Hello again. If you already know Tucker Carlson lies and you're just looking for some solid evidence to show to some lost family members, welcome. Thank you for the views. If you're a Tucker Carlson fan, welcome even more. I make these videos specifically for you. I put in the time and the effort for one reason and one reason only: to convince you that I am not your enemy. Democrats are not your enemy. If anybody's your enemy, it's Tucker Carlson, because all he does is lies to you, mostly about us, in order to make you hate us. He doesn't want you to realize that your interests are probably much more aligned with our interests than they are with his. Tucker spends this entire segment doing nothing but trying to scare you into not watching any other networks. He wants you to get all your information from him and him alone. He's going to pretend that he's showing you how those other networks don't care about you or your problems and are using Jan 6th hearings as a distraction in order to take the focus off of your problems. He will fail miserably at this, though. And it will only make sense if you understand that his only goal is to get you to not watch the hearings. More importantly, not watch any other networks at all, ever. Because if you ever did, you'd realize he's been lying to you all along. Let's watch.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Thank heaven it's Friday, mostly because it's not Thursday. Yesterday was Thursday, a day that will live in shame in the history of the American news business. Yesterday, last night, every news network in this country, but this one, faithfully surrendered its entire primetime lineup to Nancy Pelosi. So in place of news coverage, people who tuned in got 2 straight hours of unedited campaign propaganda scripted by the Democratic Party.
Tucker starts right off by challenging your sense of reality itself. As he's saying this was scripted by the Democratic Party, he's showing you an image of Liz Cheney, a lifelong conservative Republican. He's trying to tell you, without actually having to tell you, because that'd be crazy, that the Democrats have some kind of magic power over Liz Cheney, that they can get her to do their propagandizing for them. Just think. Wait. Don't think. That's not right. Just feel. Feel what they could do to you if you watched them.
The effect was North Korean.
And we know all those North Koreans are brainwashed. And the same thing will happen to you if you watch.
Every channel the same. Nothing like it has ever happened in this country.
Except for every mass shooting, every hurricane, every flood, every State of the Union address, and 9/11. Except for every event that has significant national or global implications. You know this, and Carlson knows you know this. He's just trying to shut down the part of you that thinks, so he can play on your emotions. He just needs to scare you into not watching the hearings. Speaking of playing into the emotional part of you, I don't think it's an accident that this,
every channel the same,
sounds like this.
The Lord says it is done. The Lord says it is done. The Lord says it is done.
He's playing to the same emotional center in your brain.
Now, the news anchors who faithfully did Pelosi's bidding pretended they were airing some sort of congressional hearing.
They didn't pretend anything. That's what they were doing.
But they were lying. It was not a hearing. At a hearing, dissent is permitted. The other side can speak.
The other side could have spoken. They chose not to. In some cases, they even refused subpoenas to speak. One of those cases, Steve Bannon, actually proved me wrong. He may actually spend time behind bars for refusing his subpoena. Still others took the fifth on every question they were asked. Carlson is ironically telling you that the committee are the ones suppressing the truth. They're the ones trying to brainwash the sheep. And if you watch, you will be a sheep. That's how little he thinks of your ability to discern truth from lies.
Evidence is presented. Evidence is not censored or deceptively edited. That's not allowed.
And that's not what happened here. This is just more of Carlson telling you not to get brainwashed. He's telling you that you get fooled by the deceptively edited videos, so don't watch.
So what we saw last night was definitely not a hearing, it was a show trial. There was no pretense of fairness or accuracy. The whole thing was indecent.
But we didn't see anything last night because we refused to watch it. Tucker switched from
People who tuned in
to
what we saw last night
is just planting the notion, paradoxically, in your mind that you essentially watched it. You just know what happened, so it's the same thing as watching without having to risk being brainwashed. That's how Tucker can continue with the what we watched language, knowing full well, and you knowing full well, that you didn't watch any of it, and you never will. This is the true danger of Tucker Carlson and his decade of lies. I'm out there in the world. I have family who get all their information from Fox News. I'm on social media where I run into people who get all their information from Fox News. I'm on discussion boards where I interact with people like you who get all their information from Fox News. You all tell me how these hearings were not hearings, and you echo almost word for word what Tucker Carlson just said. And not one of you has seen the hearings. You just know what is happening without ever seeing the hearings. Come on, tell me you don't. You know you do. And it's not a mystery. You know because Tucker Carlson just told you what happened, and you just believed him. Now you're out there, ironically, thinking you're the informed one. More importantly, you're the smart one, because you chose willful ignorance. Yeah. This entire Carlson segment is designed to convince you that willful ignorance is the true path to enlightenment. Don't let him. We need you to be informed. The country needs you.
How many people were convinced by what they saw last night? Right around 0.
Now, of course, that's simply not true. That was just Carlson telling you that you are the smart ones for not having wasted your time. More importantly, if you want to keep considering yourself to be smart, you never will watch them.
They're not going to win a single vote, so why'd they do it? There had to be a reason. They're not that stupid.
Last I checked, network news channels don't get votes. Up to this point, Tucker's been talking about network news channels. Now he's saying they're not going to win a single vote, so why'd they do it? He's just trying to link, in your mind, the entirety of mainstream media with the Democratic Party without even having to say it. Now, of course, this is nothing new. Tucker's been doing this every day, 365 days a year. CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, all working for the Democrats, all trying to get Democrats elected. All of their program decisions have one and only one purpose: to keep Democrats in power. This is how Fox News and you build your very own reality, independent of the one the rest of us inhabit. It's just not true. Please peek out of the rabbit hole every now and then. We need you. The world is not what Tucker Carlson's telling you it is.
Well, the reason they did it is every minute news anchors are whining about some imaginary threat from QAnon. Remember QAnon?
Yeah, that QAnon thing where Tucker's been telling you for years that we've been worried about QAnon. Well, that's just not true. It's what you call a lie. Nobody ever talked about QAnon except to laugh at the nut jobs who believed the absolute nonsense. Nobody ever portrayed it as a threat to anything that anybody actually cared about. It's a lie with a purpose, though. It makes us look stupid in your eyes. You and Carlson can make up a lie of what we believe and then have a laugh at us for believing it. Tucker can't allow you to know what we really care about, because you might realize you care about those same things. So Tucker spends every minute of every show making sure you never do.
Every minute they're doing that, they're not covering the collapse of the American economy, something everyone actually cares about.
Part of me thinks that I shouldn't even mention how stupid this is, because you already know how stupid it is. You know there are 365 days in a year, 24 hours in a day. Even if we knock off the weekends, that still leaves approximately 6,257 hours of news coverage per year per network. That leaves them more than enough time to cover all kinds of other subjects, including inflation, which they do. You saw that, right? Again, this is just Tucker Carlson telling you not to listen to anybody else because all they're talking about on those other networks is QAnon. On those other networks, they're just laughing at little old ladies rotting in jail for walking around the rotunda in the Capitol building on January 6th. They're certainly not going to spend any time whatsoever talking about the issues you care about. And Tucker is going to appear to base his entire argument around this ridiculous premise. But again, he's not actually making an argument. He's not even going to attempt to show that anything he's about to say is correct, or even if it were correct, that it would form a coherent argument. He's just saying it as an excuse to talk about bad things happening in the world while showing a graphic of Biden. Again, it's not an oversight that he doesn't attempt to explain to you what exactly Biden did to cause any of the bad things. That would be an argument, which he isn't making. He's just creating associations in your mind of bad things with Biden. And since mainstream media works for Biden, don't watch them.
Collapse is a strong word, but how would you describe it?
I describe it as a problem with inflation. Certainly not a collapse. But Carlson has to revert to hyperbolic language. It's the only thing that elicits the emotional response that he needs. Again, he's trying really hard to scare you so that you turn off reason.
Today, inflation hit 8.6%. Those are the official numbers. Those are the numbers arrived at using the government's own cooked metrics.
So I hope you can see how he's trying to play you there. Here's the information he offered.
Those are the official numbers. Those are the numbers arrived at using the government's own cooked metrics.
Ask yourself, what information did this add? It adds nothing, right? The cooked metrics thing was just a trigger to remind you not to trust your government. And the fact that you probably thought when I said your government, it's not my government, is proof that it's working. If Tucker cared enough about you to help you understand what's really going on, he has more than 10 minutes that he could explain to you exactly how these numbers are cooked. But explanations kind of throw a wet rag on conspiracies. It's always much better just to make the accusation and let your mind wander.
But it's still the highest increase in inflation in more than 40 years. So it's not surprising that consumer confidence is at the lowest level ever recorded. Why? Really, it comes down to energy.
Or at least that's all Tucker Carlson wants you to believe. Because the entire economy rests on one simple thing. Nothing else could possibly be a factor in inflation. It certainly can't be any of the major economic disruptions caused by COVID. The irony here is that in about 6 minutes, Carlson is going to completely contradict himself. Really, he will. Watch.
The cost of energy is up nearly 40% over last year.
Now would be a great time to explain why that is. But of course he won't. Maybe oil companies, seeing 300% more profits than in the first quarter of 2021, a total of more than $35 billion in profits in just 3 months, might have something to do with it. But he's not going to tell you about any of that, even though he would never defend corporations getting rich at your expense. Nah, never.
The average price of a gallon of gas is now over $5, but it won't stop there. JP Morgan predicts it'll get to $6, and soon. So when the price of fuel goes up, so does the price of everything else, because our transportation systems are dependent on the price of fuel. And when it gets high enough, people can't go anywhere.
Now, I don't mean to be making light of any struggles you may be facing, but you can still go places. It's going to cost you more, and you might have to sacrifice other things, but you can still go places. Just remember, he's not making an argument. He's stoking hatred of other. Which other doesn't really matter, just other. He just wants you mad at somebody.
Even the police. In Michigan, one department says it can no longer respond to emergency calls because the price of gas has gone too high. Quote, "We've exhausted what funds were budgeted for fuel with several months to go before the budget reset," said the sheriff of Isabella County on Tuesday. Quote, "I've instructed the deputies to attempt to manage whatever calls are acceptable over the phone." So enforcing the law over the phone. It sounds like a story from the third world, but that's America. It's Michigan.
It's not immediately apparent why Tucker even included this little bit. Isabella County, Michigan, population 64,394, of which 10,449 live in unincorporated areas, i.e. served by the sheriff. Population density of 110 people per square mile is certainly not indicative of any widespread problem. This little tidbit isn't even just another bad thing that he's trying to associate with Democrats. He's planting in your mind that you should be afraid it's going to happen to you, and there will be nobody there to protect you when the roving hordes come to destroy all that is holy. That's what this was for.
That's America. It's Michigan.
Oh yeah, and it's all Democrats' fault that oil prices are high. Somehow. Take his word for it.
And it's just the beginning. A CNBC survey just found that 68% of corporate CFOs are predicting a recession soon. 0 chief financial officers surveyed by CNBC believed a recession could be avoided. All of them thought it was absolutely inevitable.
And now would be a great time for Tucker to educate all of you about the factors that have played a role in creating this problem. But he won't, because he's just stoking hatred.
What are the effects? Well, one of them is staples, food prices. They were already up 5% in December. They're now up more than 10% year over year. So when food becomes too expensive to buy, you have a crisis. How is the administration responding to this crisis, a demonstrable crisis? Well, Biden has just unveiled new regulations on ethanol.
And that is just a flat-out lie. It would take you all of 15 seconds to Google it. Biden is suspending a federal rule preventing the sale of higher ethanol blend gasoline this summer, which is usually between June 1st and September 15th, because of concerns that it adds to smog at high temperatures. It will affect about 2,300 gas stations in the Midwest and the South, including Texas. So everything that Tucker Carlson's about to say about it is just a lie.
By the way, here's a really simple test if you want to know you're speaking to someone who understands anything about science or the environment. Anyone who tells you ethanol is good for the, quote, environment is either ignorant or lying. We know after decades of studying it that ethanol hurts the environment. There is no environmental benefit to ethanol, and there's a massive cost, both to the land and also to you.
Damn. That's right. So I guess not everything is a lie. Environmentalists have actually been saying this ever since they started adding ethanol to gasoline, that it's just pork for the corn states. Maybe Carlson can ask the representatives from Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, Minnesota, Indiana, Kansas, why they won't let any appropriations bills pass in Congress without getting their little taste in the form of corn subsidies.
Thanks to Biden, gasoline refiners will be forced to blend 20 billion gallons of ethanol because it's a renewable fuel for the planet.
Nobody's forced to do anything. They're being allowed to. That's the opposite of being forced. And you can't blame this one on environmentalists. We've never pushed for ethanol in gasoline. We've always seen the subsidies as pork. So Carlson can take his sarcasm and cornhole it.
But what this really is a requirement from the Biden administration to burn food in your car.
Nope. It's allowing them to burn the ethanol from the corn that they wouldn't have grown if it weren't for the subsidies in the first place.
That's what ethanol is. It's corn. So what happens when you divert food crops like corn to ethanol production? Well, we know the answer because it's been studied for decades. In 2008, an evolutionary biologist at Cornell called David Pimentel wrote this, quote, "The use of corn for ethanol has led to major increases in the price of U.S. beef, chicken, pork, eggs, bread, cereal, milk. It's a boon to agribusiness and a bane to consumers." In fact, the Director General of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization reports that using 22 pounds of corn to produce 1 gallon of ethanol is already causing food shortages. Well, of course. That was 2008. This is not news. Anyone who's been paying attention can tell you. Ethanol is bad for the environment. It's terrible for engines.
Okay, that's correct too. But we have to remember, he's not making an argument. He's just listing bad things and erroneously blaming Democrats. Stoking hatred.
And it is above all a disaster for your food supply. So at the same moment we are facing food shortages, the Biden administration has decided to make food scarcer and more expensive.
Now that just makes no sense, because the only thing there will be less of is corn, which we already have too much of because of the subsidies. That is in no way the entirety of the food supply. Of course, Carlson's real goal is to make Democrats look bad, so he can push the narrative that they are coming after you.
Food will be just as expensive as gasoline.
And $10 to the first person who puts in the comment section what that could possibly mean. But of course, it's not supposed to mean anything. It's just supposed to create a sense of hatred for Democrats. It's nothing more than something bad, something bad, something bad, something bad, Democrats.
Now, you probably hadn't heard about that because once again, last night, every single news network in this country, except ours, was reporting on something else.
And now we're back to the absolutely ridiculous premise that if they weren't talking about the economy and inflation for those exact 2 hours, there is no other time to talk about it. Nope, that was it. They missed it.
Here are their priorities.
This primetime presentation was both clear and it was compelling. The first in a historic set of hearings here.
This is not just about what happened on January 6th or in the days leading up to it. It's about a clear and present danger to our democracy.
I have to say, it's just historic to me. This was a hearing unlike any other.
I think the committee did a great job tonight. I thought Liz Cheney was particularly strong.
It was a very powerful, very well produced, if you will, 2-hour presentation.
Tonight, the January 6th committee concluded the first of a series of its public hearings, and the point was abundantly clear. Our democracy remains in danger.
Let's pause here for a moment to let that sink in. Has the profundity set in yet? It leaves no doubt as to why, of all the clips from the other networks, Carlson could have chose to include, he chose those ones. Right? No? Those clips didn't seem relevant at all? Yeah, they don't need to be. Tucker's just going to ignore what they actually said and tell you how much these pundits hate you. You and your common folk problems. But first, Carlson has to obliterate irony.
These people. Now, normally you could just say, well, they're dumb. That's why they're in TV in the first place.
Does he think you don't realize he's on TV?
Reading scripts that somebody else wrote. I mean, it really is like Anchorman, if you want to be totally honest about it. Hair hats reading words they don't understand. That is true. That's actually what it is.
I'm not even going to try. Do you think he doesn't know he's describing himself?
But in this case, it's more than ignorance. It's more than stupidity. It's complicity in a campaign to fool the public.
And the absolutely ridiculous premise, yet again.
To make you believe that your personal concerns, like the fact you can't buy food or drive anywhere or the police won't come because they can't afford gas, those are not important. What's really important is some other thing that you should be terrified of. Russia, it's Putin. It's QAnon, it's the white supremacists. They're going to get you.
I have to admit that these little bits of absolute stupidity, bordering on mania, might exceed my analytical abilities. The easy part is noting the continuation of the lie that somebody can't buy food or gas, and the imagery of the post-apocalyptic hellscape from the imminent collapse, and that your police won't be able to save you from the marauding hordes because some sheriff's office in rural Michigan didn't budget properly. That's why I included the sheriff thing. The harder part is talking about the completely alternative reality in which you and Carlson must live. Sorry. For everybody who actually watched the hearings, the clips sounded perfectly reasonable. Hell, even to people who didn't watch the hearings because they had other stuff to do, there was not a hint that the commentators thought that the Jan 6th hearings were the only thing with which they should be concerned. Let's watch it again.
This primetime presentation was both clear and it was compelling. The first in a historic set of hearings here.
This is not just about what happened on January 6th or in the days leading up to it. It's about a clear and present danger to our democracy.
So I have to say, it's just historic to me. This was a hearing unlike any other.
I think the committee did a great job tonight. I thought Liz Cheney was particularly strong.
It was a very powerful, very well produced, if you will, 2-hour presentation.
Tonight, the January 6th committee concluded the first of a series of its public hearings, and the point was abundantly clear. Our democracy remains in danger.
Yeah, nothing in there that can be interpreted by any reasonable person as trying
to make you believe that your personal concerns, like the fact you can't buy food or drive anywhere or the police won't come because they can't afford gas, those are not important.
And not a single thing that would suggest
what's really important is some other thing that you should be terrified of.
And there was certainly no mention of
Russia, it's Putin. It's QAnon, it's the white supremacists.
And definitely not even a hint that
they're going to get you.
All of this only works if you are completely unaware, not only of what actually happened in the hearings, or what happened on January 6th or the lead up to it, but of anything at all outside your right-wing echo chamber. You have to know, although you're wrong, you have to know that nothing really happened on January 6th, and that no Trump supporters did anything wrong, that all the violence was Antifa and the FBI. The Trump supporters were just taking a stroll through the rotunda, exactly what Tucker Carlson has actually been telling you since January 6th. In that context, and only in that context, the totally innocuous comments that those commentators said are understood as crazy, as a witch hunt to get Trump, and by proxy, you. Because the only reason that the Democrats and mainstream media hate Trump is because he was sticking up for you. That's what that little bit about Russia, Putin, QAnon, and white supremacists at the end was for. In Tucker's world, mainstream media just tried to scare the American people. Just the sheep, of course, because you were on it all along. With fake stories to bring down Trump for no reason other than he was putting America first and thwarting the globalists' nefarious plans. That's why Tucker Carlson can't have you getting information from any other source. If you did, you realize that the universe Carlson has constructed is built on nothing but lies, except for the ethanol stuff. That was true.
And anyone who worries about gas prices, anyone who's concerned about how to feed his or her family, gets a lecture that actually you're just selfish. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, really? Or whatever the talking point is.
The lecturing nonsense only makes sense if seen as a warning. If you watch those other networks, they will lecture you. Because nobody lectured anybody in the clips he showed. And the pandemic of the unvaccinated silliness was just a callback to previous lies that Tucker told you about the efficacy of the vaccines. Yes, those were lies too, but I'm not going to get into that right now.
Here was CNN last night. Watch.
But I think for something like this to happen, to have an attack on the Capitol, to have an attack on our democracy, to have a president of the United States saying that he won the election when he didn't, I think that is more important than anything. If you don't have a functioning democracy, then it doesn't matter if you have a penny gas prices. You don't have a functioning democracy. And people are going to think, well, what does this matter for gas prices or whatever? Okay, fine, we'll get to the gas prices. That's always going to happen. What does this mean for inflation? Fine, we'll get to that. We talk about that all the time. Yeah. What this means for our democracy is the most important thing, and that's what we should be focusing on.
Let's flip the script here and look at this before Carlson tries to gaslight you. It was a rather short little clip. First thing we heard was
to have a president of the United States saying that he won the election when he didn't, I think that is more important than anything.
Sounds reasonable, no? I'd be hoping that if most people had to choose between $1 more per gallon of gas or ignoring the will of the people when it comes to choosing the highest office in the land, that they'd say that trying to overturn an election is much more important.
If you don't have a functioning democracy, then it doesn't matter if you have a penny gas prices. You don't have a functioning democracy. And people are going to think, well, what does this matter for gas prices or whatever? Okay, fine, we'll get to the gas prices. That's always going to happen. What does this mean for inflation? Fine, we'll get to that. We talk about that all the time.
Let's repeat that, maybe a couple times.
We talk about that all the time. We talk about that all the time. We talk about that all the time.
There's nothing any sane person can find wrong with what Don Lemon just said. Nothing. It makes one wonder why Tucker Carlson even included it, because Lemon says nothing the least bit controversial. It does not make Tucker Carlson's case in any way, shape, or form. But I'm guessing it might make sense to you because you already know that Jan 6th was really no threat to democracy. Because the little kerfuffle in the Capitol was nothing compared to what happened over the summer with the BLM riots. You also know that people like Don Lemon cheered the rioters who burned down entire cities, burned them to the ground. It's irrelevant that neither of those things actually happened. You know it's true regardless. In short, Tucker's telling you not to watch them. They will entirely lie to you. Now, let's see how Tucker twists what Lemon actually said.
Oh, a civics lesson from Don Lemon.
So, Tucker decides to go straight for dehumanization by mispronouncing his name. Yeah, I know it was just a really bad attempt at a joke. But the dehumanization is what's supposed to make it funny.
Mr. Lemon, tell us about democracy. What is democracy? Just sum it up for us, if you would. It's a term you use a lot. What is democracy? Well, democracy is the
Well, let's stop him right there. That is just Tucker Carlson being a punk-ass little bitch. It doesn't even matter what he says next. That's a little bitch move. But anyway, let's hear what stupid shit Tucker Carlson has to say about democracy.
Democracy is the process by which government represents voters and their concerns. Voters vote on representatives, they go to Washington, and they carry with them in their hearts the memory of the people who put them there.
Carry in their hearts the memories of the people that put them there? Do they all die?
And their concerns are first and foremost. So what are the first and foremost concerns of American voters, the people at the heart of this democracy? Well, food and gas prices.
And this is why Tucker Carlson doesn't debate. He's an idiot. Really. He's just a remarkably stupid man. Democracy is not what representatives do when they get there. It's about the process by which they get there. Dictators and despots can also keep down the price of gas and food. We're not going to be okay with them just because they can do that. Besides, the Jan 6 committee is doing exactly what I and about 71 million of our fellow Americans elected them to do. Figure out how Trump tried to subvert democracy and deny the will of the people. Our representatives can't do anything about food and gas prices anyway, so there's no point in them babbling about it endlessly. This again is Carlson not making an argument. It's just more bad thing, bad thing, bad thing, mainstream media. And anyway,
we talk about that all the time.
So, Tucker was saying.
But the people who are defending democracy look at those people and say, shut up, you selfish rube.
Except absolutely nobody said that. Again, this is a warning. If you watch CNN, they will just make fun of you. You can trust Tucker to tell you exactly how they'll belittle you if you watch them.
You really should care about January 6th because democracy.
You know, I have no idea how you're not offended by this. Carlson's telling you that you are incapable of walking and chewing gum at the same time. That you can't care both about democracy and the economy. Just how stupid does he think you are? And still,
We talk about that all the time.
yeah.
The overwhelming majority of Americans don't care about January 6th.
This is where you have to remember that he's talking to you, not me. He just really, really needs you to keep believing that nobody else cares about it and that it's all just a ruse to get Democrats' votes. Because if you actually looked into it, you would figure out that he's been lying to you this entire time. And he can't have that.
And that's why they need to beat you in the face with it again and again and again.
And yet another warning. If you dare to watch one of those other networks, they'll beat you in the face.
They wouldn't be hysterical, they wouldn't be repetitive, they wouldn't be patronizing if you actually cared, but you don't.
You know he's showing you nobody who's been hysterical, repetitive, or patronizing. I hope he's wrong about you, though. I hope you do care about democracy, even if Carlson thinks you don't. The country needs you to care. If you don't defend it, we'll lose it.
So they have to lecture you like a child.
While he's lecturing you like a child.
So with the midterms approaching, this is the Biden administration's strategy.
You caught that, right? Tucker just jumped from Don Lemon lecturing you to the Biden administration and their strategy as if they were the same thing, which is exactly what Tucker Carlson wants you to believe. He's telling you, without telling you, that the news networks and the Democratic Party work hand in hand. You, of course, already know that because Carlson's been telling you that for years. You should be aware that those are all lies, too.
Talk about something else. Shame you if you don't think it's the most important thing. So Biden began talking today. This was a speech that was billed as an address on inflation, but it didn't begin with inflation or any honest account of how we got here and how we're going to get out of it. No. It was about January 6th. Watch.
Before I begin, I want to say a few words very briefly about the January 6th hearings that were highlighted last night. The insurrection on January 6th, one of the darkest chapters in our nation's history. A brutal assault on our democracy, brutal attack on law enforcement, some losing their lives, and we heard about it last night again. To know together, and I mean this, we can unite and defend this nation, Democrat and Republican. Allow no one to place a dagger at the throat of our democracy.
Again, if you poke your head out for just a bit and watch the hearings, you know that Biden said absolutely nothing remarkable. Everything makes perfect sense. However,
I mean, the overstatement is so ridiculous. You look at everything that's going on in the world. We know what happened on January 6th because no event in human history has had more cameras trained on it.
I really do hate repeating myself, but this is a perfect encapsulation of what Tucker Carlson needs you to believe about January 6th. It is what happened only between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. on the 6th. It's only what could be televised. There was no plan to ignore the will of 81,268,924 Americans and just install Trump into power. And it's only within this profound ignorance that Tucker Carlson's adolescent reaction makes any sense whatsoever.
You can watch the video. You can spend the rest of your life watching the video on the internet.
Which is exactly what he wants you to do, but only the parts approved by Fox News. Not the stuff they showed on the other networks where police are being crushed and beaten. No, really, the police were being crushed and beaten. I'll show you that a bit later.
Why don't you go ahead and do that and get back to us? Does that look like a dagger at the heart of democracy? Is that the darkest chapter in American history? It's like insane that you even talk like that.
Yes, to the profoundly ignorant, it probably does sound insane. And that's the state in which he needs to keep you. That's why he's doing all he can do to get you not to watch the hearings.
It's QAnon, really. Trump is bad.
And as long as Tucker Carlson can keep you completely ignorant of what Trump did that actually led up to the 6th, you will continue to think that the people who think Trump is dangerous are as stupid as the non-existent people who think QAnon is dangerous.
It's repulsive, actually, when you think about it.
Yeah, it is repulsive.
Russia is threatening to destroy New York City with nuclear weapons.
Carlson is just trying to scare you again. There is zero chance that Russia is going to hit New York with anything, little less a nuclear weapon.
So how are we doing on that front?
Well, last I heard, the weapons we provided Ukraine are responsible for 75,000 Russian soldiers killed or injured. So I'd say it's pretty effective.
Well, it turns out we're sourcing a critical component in our ammunition, not just small arms, but nuclear weapons, from China.
So be very afraid. Believe Biden is screwing up yet another thing. Don't worry what that thing actually is. Just know that Biden is incompetent. Well, since Tucker's not going to tell you what that critical component is, I will. Had to look it up, though. Something called antimony. Yeah, antimony. Never heard of it either? Yeah. Apparently it's a mineral. According to DefenseNews.com, we've been sourcing it from China for as long as we've been using it. And the House Readiness Committee is looking into shoring up our stockpiles of it. That's the only mention I could find of it. I'm not sure what Tucker Carlson thinks the problem is, and he's certainly not going to tell you. It looks like he's just manufacturing another non-problem so he can make Democrats look incompetent.
So at a moment we're actually closer to war than at any time in your lifetime, at any time since 1945, since the big war ended. We're closer right now than at any time since then.
Wow. Just wow. How stupid does he think you are? He thinks you've never heard of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we had nuclear missiles 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Simply amazing.
And what are we doing about this? What's the State Department doing to fix the crisis in Eastern Europe?
Well, it's not really the State Department's problem when one country invades another on completely manufactured pretenses. But Tucker isn't really looking for an answer. He's not making an argument. He's not educating you. He's just, like always, setting up the next lie.
Well, they just announced this, they've hired a global equity ambassador. Oh, that'll fix it. Oh, more equity.
Such an idiot. I trust I don't need to tell you that. No, never mind. We'll move on.
This is nuts.
I agree.
It's like rearranging bookshelves by title as your house burns down. This is a species of mental illness.
I agree again. Carlson's perpetual lying about what Democrats and other news organizations are doing would be psychotic if we knew he didn't have an ulterior motive. You know, ratings, cash. Creating enemies has certainly paid off for him. But in this case, it's making Democrats seem crazy, so you will never go anywhere else for information.
Everybody sees how fake this is. Nobody is convinced by it.
There are, unfortunately, 3 million people a night, maybe you, that are convinced by Tucker Carlson.
It was just 2 years ago, live on television, summer of 2020, a mob of Biden voters tried to storm the White House. Do you remember this?
If Carlson were making an argument, remember this would be followed immediately by clips of the Biden mob trying to storm the White House. After all, he just said it was on live TV. But of course, he's not going to show that because he's not making an argument. He's manufacturing memories. If you didn't remember it before he said it, you'll remember it afterwards. And you'll swear on your Bible that you saw it live on television, just like Tucker said you did. You'll manufacture the necessary images by mentally photoshopping images from other protests and riots onto the White House lawn. Carlson's allowing you to manufacture the video he knows doesn't exist. More importantly, since they were Biden voters, you'll remember them carrying Biden-Harris signs while they do it. The sick beauty of that particular choice of term, Biden voters rather than protesters, is that it serves several purposes of the narrative. Without that cue, you might continue to think that the protests in D.C. were just BLM. You may have already taken all those images in your mind of the riots that took place in other cities and transported them to D.C. Now, you'll make all those rioters into Biden voters. So when anybody points out what the Trump voters did on January 6th, you can come back with, but what about what Biden voters did during the summer? They were much worse. It simply won't matter that the protests and riots during the summer were about racial injustice and had absolutely nothing to do with Biden. while the January 6th riot was only about Trump. The narrative is set. Biden voters and Trump voters are the same. That is Carlson's only goal.
They torched a church across the street.
And that's how it works. It doesn't matter that Carlson just switched the narrative from the White House to the church across the street. You will now remember that Biden voters set the White House on fire, and this is the image that will be seared into your mind.
They attacked Secret Service officers.
I must have missed the segment 2 years ago where he lied about that, so I have no idea what he's talking about. Maybe someone could put it in the comments section.
A mob called for the President of the United States to be lynched.
That, of course, would be a mob of Biden voters. Again, Carlson is manufacturing memories for you so he doesn't need to show the video. When somebody shows you video of Trump supporters chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," you can write it off as just normal politics because Biden voters did the same thing. Trying to argue with that it never actually happened will be futile because you will clearly recall all the memories you just created, unless someone can get to you before the false memory set in.
He was taken to an underground bunker for his safety.
Well, that was true. The Secret Service overreacted. The funny part is, Trump denied it. Here's what he told Brian Kilmeade. It was a false report. I wasn't down. I went down during the day, and I was there for a tiny little short period of time. And it was much more of an inspection. There was no problem during the day. That's Trump's version of it. The important thing to understand here is that Tucker Carlson wants you to believe both are true. Laws of logic be damned. Trump was both in the bunker and he wasn't. The mob was both a serious threat and a trifle, something Trump could have dispatched with the force of will alone.
We don't like to be hysterical.
Yes, Tucker only does it for the cash. Acting like a madman every day brings in an audience, as long as he's screaming about some imaginary enemy.
We kind of downplayed it at the time. Probably shouldn't have. Maybe we should have been as hysterical as Joe Biden. This is Pearl Harbor.
First, the only person acting hysterically is Tucker Carlson. Second, Tucker's praising himself for not getting historical about some boogeyman he just made up. That's kind of weird.
But that would have been lying, so we didn't.
It hasn't ever stopped him before.
This is what our country's capital looked like at the time.
And there's the switch he's counting on you not to have noticed. This is what our country's capital looked like at the time. We have to remember that Tucker Carlson is talking to you, not me. I know he's lying. What he's really doing is helping you form memories. He's going to prime you with the word capital and then seed you with the images. Whether it was the Capitol or the Capitol building is really not that important. It's still the Capitol, and Biden's voters were doing bad things in it. Much worse than what Trump voters did. The interesting thing here is that these are the most damning videos Carlson could find.
Very good, man. Come on. Come on, man. Why you gotta do this, man?
So, we have a small fire at a church that was condemned by all. People knocking over barriers. A car on fire, again, condemned by all. Police pushing back a protest line. You should pay attention, though, to the direction in which that line was moving. We'll see something very different shortly. Something else on fire. And nothing happening. Okay.
You know, you really sort of hate to get into the war of, well, you think that's bad? This was worse. Look at our tape.
And that's the problem. Tucker is telling you that this is a war. He needs you to believe that everybody in those videos, both protesters and rioters, were all Biden voters, and that the protests were against Trump, and by proxy, you. He wants you to forget the fact that the protests were about racial injustice, and the only way they can have been against Trump or you is if you were for racial injustice. Which you're not, right? The simple fact remains, in the reality Tucker Carlson is manufacturing for you, this is a war. Simply watching those other networks is an act of treason.
But really, it's just too much. Stop lying to us.
Fine. Let's see who's lying. This is what Tucker has told you happened on January 6th, complete with liberal commentators spazzing out about nothing.
It can be used as weapons. Claire McCaskill, you know the Senate well. I assume you have a memory of anything near like this.
We just saw protesters walking through Statuary Hall, Claire. I just don't want to interrupt, but we just saw people going right through. There they are.
And our
in Statuary Hall. Now that is the area.
Is that the Walt Whitman camera that's capturing those? I believe.
No.
Whitman statue.
I'm not sure whether that's the Walt Whitman camera, but what that is the area where the senators process to go into the House for joint sessions. So it is through there that they walk.
Unbelievable.
Every time they go into the office.
We are televising the breach.
Listen,
by the way.
In order to get to the Capitol, I mean, the Capitol is a free place to go. You are allowed to go to the Capitol. But you got to go through metal detectors. You got to go through security. And when you breach that, you haven't gone through security. And you got to imagine that is making a lot of the Capitol Police and other folks inside the Capitol right now very, very uncomfortable and very nervous.
I mean, the electoral vote mahogany boxes were walked through that Statuary Hall, right through there. These are people you can't get through with a hairbrush that's
like
metal. How do they get through with a flagpole through the metal detectors?
This is like watching some scene from a bad movie.
I worked for years in that building, and
it's unbelievable. Garrett Haake you have some new information for us. Sorry, Katie, didn't mean to cut you off. But I think Garrett
I'm just watching this now, and just to put it in a context of how extraordinary it is, in Statuary Hall, at the left of your screen, that door there is a position you sometimes see us go live from with that big statue of Will Rogers over our shoulders. That's maybe 20 yards off of the House floor, if that. And there is nothing between these protesters and the floor of the United States House except about 20 yards of marble hallway and one big door. And to put another finer point on it, you know, last time I remember big protests in the Capitol complex was around the Kavanaugh hearings. Those protests were confined to the outer office buildings. Even then, when these buildings were open to the public, we knew there would be big protests happening. You can't get into this building unless you're a guest, you're on a list, you've been screened, you've gone through metal detectors and so forth. To have people just milling about at this level of sort of proximity to the inner cloister of the federal government is nothing like I've ever seen before. I mean, it just doesn't happen. And there's, as you can see clear as day from the video, there's no meaningful police control of that situation. I see some officers on the bottom left of the screen, but I mean, clearly they're pretty fully outnumbered in this moment.
I'll give you that those comments seemed completely out of proportion to what we were seeing. Yeah, they were silly. If that's all there was, yes, liberals would be pitching a fit about nothing. We'd be as crazy as Tucker needs you to believe we are. This, however, is just a little taste of what you would see if you watched the first hearing.
We are on your side. Don't make us go against you. Understand the side. Pick a side. These are our streets. Get back, ladies! Get back, ladies! We're going to give riot warnings as soon as the outlet is here. We're going to give riot warnings. We're going to try to get compliance, but this is now effectively a riot.
49 hours declaring it a riot.
Hold the line! Hold the line! Hold the line! Hold the line! Back the line! 42. We're about 5 miles out. We're trying to make our way through all this. Bring out Pence! Bring out Pence! Bring out Pence! Trying to hold the upper deck now. We need to hold the doors of the Capitol. I need public support. We lost the line. We lost the line. All MPDs pull back. All MPDs pull back up to the upper deck. All MPDs pull back to the upper deck.
Okay, H208 with 4 members. The door's barricaded. There's people flooded the hallways outside. We have no way out.
In fact, officers still remaining on the House floor, on the third floor, to use the subways themselves. It's time to evacuate so we can secure the members on the other side. Copy.
It's up to us people now, the American people.
And what are you ready to do?
One more time.
What are you ready to do?
And whatever it takes, I'll lay my life down if it takes.
Absolutely. That's why we showed up today.
Bring her out! Bring her out here!
Hey!
We're coming in if you don't bring her out! Fuck you, you son of a bitch! You back up! You back up!
I have my cell phone back.
Don't even try.
Get him up! Get him up! Get him up! Hold up! Get him up! Thank you to send to that West Carriage door for backup.
People. These were great people. The crowd was unbelievable. And I mentioned the word love. The love in the air. I've never seen anything like it.
I want to start, Officer Edwards, with a short clip that shows the horrible moment when you were injured as the peace circle was breached.
I've worked, I can, conservatively say probably hundreds of civil disturbance events. I know when I'm being turned into a villain, and that's when I turned to my sergeant and I stated the understatement of the century. I said, Sarge, I think we're gonna need a few more people down here. They approached our bike racks. At that time, we started holding on, grabbing the bike racks. There weren't many of us, so I grabbed the middle between 2 different bike racks. And, I wasn't under any pretense that I could hold it for very long, but I just wanted to, make sure that we could get more people down and get our CDU units time to answer the call. So we started grappling over the bike racks. I felt the bike rack come on top of my head, and I was pushed backwards, and my foot caught the stair behind me, and my chin hit the handrail, and then at that point I had blacked out, but the back of my head clipped the concrete stairs behind me.
And you were knocked unconscious, is that right, Officer Edwards?
Yes, ma'am.
But then when you regained consciousness, even with the injuries, you returned to duty, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. When I fell behind that line and I can just remember my breath catching in my throat, because what I saw was just a war scene. It was something like I'd seen out of the movies. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were officers on the ground, you know, they were bleeding, they were throwing up, they were, you know, they had, I mean, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood. You know, I was catching people as they fell. It was carnage. It was chaos. I can't even describe what I saw. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that as a police officer, as a law enforcement officer, I would find myself in the middle of a battle. You know, I'm trained to detain, you know, a couple of subjects and handle a crowd, but I'm not combat trained. And that day, it was just hours of hand-to-hand combat, hours of dealing with things that were way beyond any law enforcement officer has ever trained for. And I just remember that moment of stepping behind the line and just seeing the absolute war zone that the West Front had become.
But really, it's just too much. Stop lying to us.
So, there are two possibilities here. One, Tucker is as ignorant as he needs you to be, and he really believes the nonsense he spouts daily. Or two, he's a disgusting piece of shit liar. I can't say for sure which one he is, but those are the only two options. My money's on the latter.
Stop telling us things that we know for a fact are not true because we watch them in real time.
Again, if he watched them, he's a disgusting piece of shit because no decent human being could have watched what Trump unleashed on Congress and the Capitol Police and not been disgusted by it.
You didn't hear anything about that last night, about similar riots that destroyed cities all over the United States. You didn't hear a single word.
First, you didn't hear anything because you didn't watch the hearings. Carlson told you not to. So you have no idea what they talked about. Second, no cities were destroyed. There was some damage done to some buildings, which is universally condemned, but the cities, they were fine. Third, they didn't talk about it last night because it wasn't an attack on our democracy.
None of that was a dagger at the throat of our democracy. All of it happened in an election year with the aim of influencing the election.
Tucker's not going to tell you how protests against racial injustice could hurt Republican chances, but he seems to assume that you would all agree. Never quite understood that one. Regardless, trying to persuade people to vote for a particular party is not even in the same universe as trying to throw out their votes. The former is campaigning. The latter is sedition.
Unmentioned, you heard not one word about the guy who just tried to assassinate a Supreme Court justice at his home at the urging of the Senate Majority Leader.
The Senate Majority Leader did not urge anybody to assassinate a Supreme Court justice.
Can't talk about any of this.
Yet he's talking about it. This is how the right built a persecution narrative. Constantly talking about stuff that nobody can talk about and claiming that they'll be canceled if they ever do talk about it, yet they never get canceled. Again, this is just building the narrative that those people at those other networks won't talk about anything real so there's absolutely no need to ever watch them.
These topics, like the state of the U.S. economy, are now off limits.
Well, 3 things. First, they're all lies, and that's why nobody's talking about them. Second, it's all Fox talks about anyways. Third, Tucker will shortly prove himself wrong.
You have to pretend that January 6, 2021 remains the single worst thing ever to happen to America, even though not one living person really believes that. And if you don't say so, if you don't confess the one true faith in public, you'll be hurt.
He's just trying to scare you some more. Again, they are coming to hurt you. Clever of Carlson to use the passive voice there, so he never has to tell you exactly who's going to hurt you. Just load up your AR-15s, you'll be fine. This language adds up over time, to the point where you will literally hate Democrats for no reason other than the lies he's told you.
It just happened to an NFL coach called Jack Del Rio. He just learned this lesson. A completely Soviet moment. We've got more on that in just a minute.
So, Jack Del Rio told reporters, quote, "People's livelihoods are being destroyed. Businesses are being burned down. No problem. And then we have a dust-up at the Capitol. Nothing burned down, and we're going to make that a major deal," unquote. Apparently, Del Rio gets all his information from Fox News and is ignorant as the rest of them. His punishment? The team for which he works fined him $100,000. So he'll have to try to squeak by on the $3.4 million he'll make this year. Seriously, can you imagine the horror of trying to live on only $3.4 million for an entire year? I couldn't think of a more Soviet moment.
But first, take a few steps back. So this is a perverse arrangement, and you got to wonder who benefits. The Congress and the entirety of corporate media bury the actual problems facing the United States, pretend like they're not even happening.
But
we talk about that all the time.
But by all means, Tucker, go on pretending like they don't.
Why are they doing this, and who is getting rich from it?
Tucker's not going to tell you why or who is getting rich, though. He's not even going to tell you it's Democrats. Moreover, he's about to say there's nothing anybody can do about it. He will be content with planting the seed that somebody is getting rich at your expense. It's better for the narrative if you can't actually name them. Much more conspiratorial.
Inflation doesn't happen by accident. It's the product of choices. The inflation we're now living through was created on purpose.
Again, Tucker's not going to tell you who created it and for what purpose. Well, at least not in a way that made any sense. And he's certainly not going to explain how he changed from this.
Really, it comes down to energy.
Remember that from just 5 minutes ago? Yeah, he's forgotten all about it. The only reason he brought it up in the first place was so that he could scare people into believing that the police wouldn't have the gas to get to crime scenes. Now that that purpose is served, he'll just forget he ever said it.
The United States government got to a place where the debt was too big. And the only answer was to inflate it away.
So the U.S. government
is getting rich from it.
I told you it wouldn't make sense. He's literally just saying things that sound like reasons in order to push the paranoia that they are out to get you. Somebody who's interested in educating would have explained what makes one a major debt holder and why the only way out of it is to inflate it away. Carlson, of course, isn't, so he won't say.
If you are a major debt holder, the only way out for you is to make the money less valuable. And so they did this on purpose.
This, of course, makes absolutely no sense. They, in Tucker's story, are the Democrats. They are only interested in power. He spent this entire segment asserting that they are covering the hearings only to distract from the inflation they created on purpose. Why not just let the debt grow if that's all it would take to tamp down inflation? Like I've said probably too many times now, he's not making an argument. It doesn't matter if the things he says contradict each other. He's assuming you won't notice or you won't care. All you will hear is bad things Democrats are doing to hurt you.
They want inflation to skyrocket, of course, and continue to rise. You're not going to hear any of that from the professional commentators on cable news.
Except
we talk about that all the time.
For those of us who watch cable news, we hear it all the time. But I'm not the you Tucker's really talking to. He's talking to you, who, of course, is not going to see it because you're never going to watch those other news programs, which is exactly the only thing he's trying to achieve in this segment.
But you will hear it from people who still have common sense, like this guy at a gas station the other day. Watch this.
So, remember how he was just saying that other networks don't cover economic problems? Well, make sure you look at the upper left and bottom right corners of this clip.
The economic jolts is not felt equally. A new Bank of America report found household credit card spending for fuel surged to 7.8% by the end of May, but a whopping 9.5% for families making under $50,000.
They call it inflation, but somebody's pocket are getting inflated. We're the ones hurting down here, the poor people.
Tucker Carlson had to go, of all places, to MSNBC to find a clip of somebody talking to a working class person about the impact of inflation. One of the networks that never talk about the struggles of the working people. Apparently, he couldn't find a single clip from Fox News. I can only guess that Tucker and his staff assumed you wouldn't notice.
Okay. So inflation almost certainly is hurting you. In fact, a new analysis out today showed that the average family will pay this year a full month in its total income just in inflation. A full month.
And that was for those of you who don't know that 8% is roughly 1 of 12.
Who's it good for? Well, if you've got massive corporate debt, it's a really good deal.
Again, Tucker assumes you won't notice that he just switched from U.S. debt to corporate debt. It's all they. Corporations and government are working hand in hand to screw you.
Because you get to pay yesterday's accounts, yesterday's debts, with today's inflated dollars. That money has lower real value, so you are getting a deal. It's a scam. They're doing this on purpose.
Now, the corporations are somehow responsible for inflating the dollar. How? Who knows? And Carlson doesn't need to explain. He just needs you to get angry.
But you could only pull that off if the people you were hurting were completely distracted. So let's scream at them some more about January 6th. Then they might not notice.
So they are both stupid and evil because clearly their diabolical plot isn't working. Everybody's talking about inflation all the time, and Democrats are getting killed in the polls.
At this point, we don't really have a choice but to tolerate inflation. That's the truth. The traditional way to attack inflation is to raise interest rates. But inflation has gotten so high that it's going to be pretty tough to do that. U.S. debt to GDP now stands at nearly 125%. That means for every point we raise the interest rate, we're going to wind up paying even more in interest charges on that debt.
I'm not an economist, but I'm pretty sure that was just gibberish. If you want another take on the cause of the inflation, check out the link to Robert Reich in the description.
If the Fed tries to raise interest rates anyway to the point they might actually affect inflation, what will that do? Let's say you bumped it 11 points, which you'd probably have to do to get inflation under control. Jerome Powell, who runs the Fed, has already said there's no limit to how high interest rates could go. At least one financial expert has said 6% interest rates could be coming, and maybe that's just a start, on top of the ones we've already seen. Now, what would that mean for you? Well, interest rates that high would crush Americans with credit card debt. And that's most of the country. In fact, it's the highest rate ever. It would make buying a house basically impossible. It would crash markets. It would crush asset prices. Are we going to do that? That's kind of our option. Probably not. So record inflation is likely here to stay.
So, in short, there's nothing anybody can do about it, but it's all the Democrats' fault because they are evil and hate hardworking Americans. And whatever you do, don't watch the Jan 6th hearings on the other networks. Better yet, don't watch the other networks at all because they won't talk 24/7 about the only problem you care about, for which there happens to be no solution. And let's not forget, hate Democrats because they hated you first.
If you want to know why they're talking about January 6th in primetime, that's why.
Yes, because the entire day is 2 hours long. And that's it for this time. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.